Hello, everybody. My name is Colton from Colton Iverson Writing. I'm on Twitter, on Instagram, but I'm here today with a fantastic guest and author, Sasha. Could you give yourself an introduction, please?
Hello, my name is Sasha Kehoe. I am an indie author. I write urban fantasy. You can check out a lot of my work on my website, sashakehoe.com. I do have a book that's coming out, and I'm sure, talk about it today, called Oath of a Viking. It is coming out on June 7th. I also run a podcast called Supernatural Movie Machine. So that's where we talk about supernatural movies. And of course, follow me on all social media. Again, just search for me by sasha.kehoe.
Gotcha.
That's how you find me.
Cool. And yeah, that'll be all in the description, all that stuff. Everybody knows how it goes. But
Yeah.
So, Sasha, my first question for you is, what inspires you to write? Because I have lots of questions about your urban Viking fantasy, which is just an interesting sentence all on its own. But what inspires you to write?
So I am one of those writers, like many of us out there, who have always been writing.
Yeah.
I was writing stories in the, back of my notebook when I should have been paying attention in classes in high school, and, writing little romances when I was in middle school. So that has been just something I've always done.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, it's something I want to move from being a hobby into more of a professional realm. So that's really just taking that next step up to the next level of being a hobbyist and trying to make it professional, because at some point you do start to realize that I have some skill and I have some ideas. so that's where I am, and that's what this major push right now is.
Very nice. Well, I mean, are there any authors, or any stories that have specifically inspired you to write about what you're currently writing right now?
So I am a huge fan of Karen Marie Moning. It's Moning. Yeah, and I'm always get a little iffy on how to pronounce that. But she is my favorite urban fantasy author, and I'd say she's a big inspiration. I started reading her books when I was in college. And it's just, I was like, I didn't know books could be like this. Yeah. So I was like, this is the kind of urban fantasy that I want to write, where it's like, it's inventive and gritty and, full of fantastic, like, supernatural things.
Yeah.
And I would say at a very young age, I read this book, and I recently did like a little TikTok about it, where it's a book called The Wild Hunt by Jane Yolen. And it's a kid's book, but it's like also like, it's kind of like how The Neverending Story is like a kid's movie, but it's like really gritty and real, and like it'll get you. It's that kind of story, and I read it when I was small, and it stayed with me so long that I was, just a couple of years ago, I was like, what is that book? Because I could remember bits and pieces of it, and then when I read it again, I was like, oh yeah, this is like what my writing is today. Yeah. So even though it's a kid's book, I totally recommend it.
That's really awesome. No, I actually, so for me, I normally don't share this much about myself, but for me, the Spiderwick Chronicles by Tony DiTerlizzi and Holly Black are like, this is my original copy from when I was like 10 years old or something. And
awesome.
I love them so much. They are my biggest inspiration. So I totally understand. Like, it's a series that has stuck with me ever since I can remember the first time I saw it, like at the library on the shelves. Anyway, so I totally get what you're saying. And I think that is just so cool that you're able to bring in that thing from your childhood, and it's kind of shaping who you are as an author today. That's amazing.
Oh yeah.
That's really
I will say that also in middle school is when I read His Dark Materials, the Philip Pullman series. And oh my God, like that's another like big inspiration for something that is fantasy, but it's so wide reaching and like reaches so deep into mythology that it blew my middle school brainer's mind.
Yeah.
So I would say those are my big three. So like childhood, middle school, then college, and like now today.
Very nice. Have you ever heard of The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. I haven't started reading it because there's so many, I'm just like, I was like, that's gonna be a project.
Okay. let me just give you read the first three. Just treat the first three as a standalone trilogy of introduction to the world, the characters, everything. That's all I'm saying. If you just start with that, it'll get you hooked. They're also really quick reads, honestly, because they're meant to be like thrillers in a way. They're like detective thrillers, wizard detective thrillers. Anyway, but they're awesome urban fantasy that is set in Chicago. So I'd say check first three. Just that's all I'll say.
I will take that recommendation because I love it when urban fantasy goes that like true mystery noir route. Like I cannot for the life of me write a great mystery because I like for my characters to be so communicative, because like in real life I'd be like, no, wait, I don't understand. I need you to finish that thought. So yeah, I love urban fantasy, like noir mystery. So yeah, no, thanks for the recommendation. I will take that.
It's my favorite series of all time, just because it just builds on the world. Each book builds on itself so well, and you get to know each character in the world. It's amazing. Anyway, back to you. So one of my main questions, it starts out with a statement, but Vikings, magic, chaos, romance, time travel, interdimensional beings. So normally these things don't really go together. I mean, like magic and romance kind of do. And like Vikings and chaos, but like time travel, interdimensional beings, they don't really mesh when you normally think about them. But like after reading the first little bit of your book and just reading your synopsis and everything as much as I could, it works. And I'm not just saying that to be nice. Like I was reading the first part and I was like, oh cool, Vikings, like they're talking crap about the English, and they're fighting and then somebody dies, and then oh wait, time stops or time slows down, sorry, they can't stop time. Time slows down and these beings are talking about bringing him and intertwining lives. I'm just like, this is insane, but it actually really works. So how did you get it to work that well? How did you come up with this amazing, strange, and really chaotic story?
So that's
big question.
Oh yeah, no, I was like, let me try to like compartmentalize the pieces of this answer. No, but that is the beautiful thing about really leaning into mythology, because these stories can be so archetypical, right? Where you can take it and really read meaning into it through any culture, any time. And when you lean into archetypical stories, you can really, you can add your own magic to it, but it has so much baked in already. Like these myths are amazing. These legends are amazing. And so, how I like to describe writing urban fantasy a lot of the time is that it's like being a conspiracy theorist, but you can use magic as an excuse. So I'm like, well, how would, so you get your paranoid brain working and you're like, well, how would that work? How could this possibly work? And then your imagination kicks in and it's like, oh, okay, well, what if this legend and this legend actually intersect? And how would that work? How would these cultures intersect? Why would there be any overlap between a Viking culture and the Fae, which are not Viking, but meshing them together is like, I don't know, what my brain is really, really good at. So and also I have like a semi obsession because when you read it, you'll see that in there with physics, because physics is like real world magic in that we don't understand. It exists, obviously it exists, physics is a thing. But we don't understand the totality of it. We don't understand the rules of the universe, from A to Z. So when there's so many gaps, you can use those legends to fill in the gaps. And that's how I just kind of ended up putting Oath together, is, starting off with these myths and these legends and creating like a focal point with the, this mysterious great cataclysm that's going to happen or will happen or has happened, or all three, like in Ragnarok, right? It's something that has happened, will happen, and is happening.
My brain.
Yes, I know. Like when you read about like time theories and things like that, it's taking the supernatural and the myths and the legends and meshing it in with physics and, time theory. And it was so, it's so fun to write, because I just like sit up and I'm just like, oh wow, like, that one, theory about the Einstein spooky qualities of, or spooky properties of matter. And so I could go on a tangent all day about how great I think all of those things are separately. So I put them together and I packaged them into a story called Oath of a Viking. And that's like my love letter to all of these things.
Okay, awesome. No, sorry, my question was big, but your answer I think was just even bigger. But that's really cool. Honestly, to be honest, I actually can make connections between Vikings and the Fae. I don't know. That's just something that, like, for me, when I think of just their cultures and the different things that are in our mythology, I can make connections with them. I have a huge fascination with the Fae and fairies, and so I love that you've taken these two awesome things, well, a million awesome things, and put them together in one book. I think it's really cool. Oh. Yeah. But okay, so why Vikings? Like, what brought on the whole thing with Vikings? Because Vikings are obviously pretty insane.
Oh yeah, I've been working on this story for a few years now, and I honestly don't remember at what point it was like, it's going to be a Viking story. Yeah. I think I started more with, what kind of universe is it, this universe that the story happens in. So when I do have, elements of the Fae, and I have this war that has happened, before time has begun and is still happening and will happen, that kind of thing. What all is involved in that. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, sometimes when I write, I feel like once I've written the story, it's kind of like it always was. Like I just uncovered the story, really. And so I couldn't tell you actually at what point I was just like, oh, this is going to be a Viking thing. I think it was just like, yes, this story is a Viking story, and it always has been, and it will be again. So the magic, I think, of these myths is really what draws me in. And then once it draws me in, I'm hooked. So it had to be Vikings.
That's amazing. So yeah, I really want to focus on what you just said there about how this story's already happened, but you're just uncovering it. I really feel that when I'm usually I plot out a book, like I plot out certain chapters and the big points, but then I discovery write as things are happening, different characters and stuff. And I do feel like the puzzle pieces are around, I'm just putting them together. And sometimes things just end up working like super well. Like what is that experience like for you?
Oh, I mean, yeah, right. Right. That's like the experience when you're writing a story, and like those things that kind of you weren't sure if they would fit, they just like slip into a groove. And then that feeling of like, oh, this is what the story is. It's always been that way. I just have now figured it out. And like I get that when you're like writing a storyline and you're like, well, I don't know exactly why they would decide to make this decision. Or take this action. And then as you write the story out, you can sometimes uncover the background of a character as you get deeper into the story. You can learn more about the character, and you're like, oh, okay, this background part of what happened with them informs how they have made this decision. And even with I would say like the magic systems especially, just you can write it, and I think it can become so intuitive, like you are in tune with this work that you're creating and the universe that it's in, that you're just writing it from your heart, and it's right, so like when you come back and you like really look at the rules of your universe and make sure that there's no plot holes and things like that, you realize like, oh, okay, these rules make sense, so like there aren't any plot holes because well, what if this happened? You're like, oh no, like there is an explanation for it. So yeah, I think when you're in the groove and in the flow of writing, like I think every writer who like has really liked their story feels that, and it's a fantastic feeling. If you haven't felt it yet, just keep writing.
Oh yeah,
and it'll happen. It'll happen for you.
No, it's happened a couple different times in a couple different stories that I've written, but sometimes it's like I have an idea. I'm like I want to incorporate this, but I don't know how, and it just sits in my mind. Sometimes I don't even write it down. It's just like it's just in there. And then something happens. I'm like, oh, I can add the idea, and it's just like this. It's just like it's weight off my shoulders. My heart my heart grew 2 sizes that day. It's just like it just feels so great. Books are a hard drug. They're really hard to get off of. So that's what I'll say with that. Yeah, that's so cool though that Vikings has always just been a part of it. I mean. A question I thought of just while you were talking about, why urban fantasy. One, I love that you're like conspiracy like that. I've never heard such a good explanation for how to write urban fantasy before, because it's so true. Because in big cities, people disappear all the time. Things happen all the time, and we don't know what happens. So I'm gonna write an urban fantasy story now where the main character is a conspiracy theorist, and when he figures out that magic is real, they're vampires or werewolves or whatever, he's like,
it just clicks, right? And you're like, oh,
like, guys, how did I not see this before? Anyway, but
yes, no, like I totally get that. That's like my intersection right now with like I'm like reading a lot about physics and a lot about time, and I'm like, oh yes, this is a lot like magic. And being able to take yourself down a safe little rabbit hole where you're like, oh yes, and if the universe works this way, then magic can work this way. And I could just take that and stretch it into something that's really observable. And then there you go. You have a whole magic system that's based in reality. So it does have rules that are baked in. It's so fun.
So you basically cheated with your magic system.
Oh yeah. I'm looking at string theory and I'm just like, haha.
I'll take that.
I'll take this.
Very nice. So a question about urban fantasy. So normally urban fantasy, the cliches are werewolves, vampires, witches, wizards. How? Yeah. I'm stuck on Vikings. Like, how did you be like, I'm not gonna do like that stuff. Y'all are basic. How did you make it fit? Because I can already tell from just reading the first part of your book that it fits. Because you're a good writer. So I'm just like curious, how did you make it fit?
So in the context of the story, here's where it like starts to merge into like fact and fiction. So with that, in Norse mythology, there are the gods, and then there are sorcerers. Let me pronounce it. I'm pretty sure it's Vorderblod, which when you read it, yes, I know, Vorderblod. But basically, they were sorcerers. And this is historically, so Norse Viking sorcerers are a thing. And of course, like every culture has its myths and legends, and its witches and its sorcerers, and so sometimes they were celebrated and sometimes they were not, because using magic sometimes seemed feminine, depending on who you ask at what time. So being able to kind of like on the backsplash of the story where there's this universe with these wars, and then taking that idea of Ragnarok, which I really like because it's cyclical, was, is, and will be. And that works with time theory. So being able to kind of delve into that culture and then really reading. So that's where you start, right? So then you delve into the culture. You're like, oh, okay, so there are sorcerers. There were sorcerers, and the women, the magic was more feminine. So there were a lot more female sorcerers, but there were male sorcerers. What's the story behind that? And it's like, okay, well, they were descendants of the gods that they believe in. Like, okay, well, that fits into what my wars are about. And that's what I'm saying, where it's like, it falls into place. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So because these wars have happened, and this is, what would happen as the fallout of these wars, where you had races mingling and then they had children. In our universe, in reality, these children were the Vorderblod and, sorceresses. So that's where it just ends. That's where the hard line of, how I got to Vikings is,
Yeah.
but that's why I feel like it always was Vikings, because they are the exact description of what I wanted to tell the story about. And I was like, oh, then there you are. I found you. So yeah, that's how I got to Vikings. And like, there are witches in the universe, like there are witches and there are creatures and there are under fae and high fae and things like that. But I really wanted to tell this story of like the fallout of this big war, and those people actually exist in our universe. You know, Matt is like, but yeah, so that's where that conspiracy comes in, right? Where I'm like, oh, these are the people who are the dead half descendants of gods, and so that's how that goes. But I am definitely pulling in some of those like creatures that are a little bit more familiar, so that it's not just off the walls like conspiracy. It's like, no, it's urban fantasy. There's magic, active magic. So
wow, the way you explained it, it just made so much sense. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it made sense.
I felt good when I said it. I was like, I hope it makes sense.
No, it really, like, when you said like, and then this hard line connected all, I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And it also, it feels like the way you're explaining it feels like I could have came up with that idea. Like, oh, why didn't I come up with that first? It's just one of those ideas where you're like watching TV at night and you see a commercial, you're like, I thought of that. That's my idea. Anyway, I just think that's so cool. Okay, so one thing, one of the last things I wanted to ask you about. So in the first part of the book, Freya.
If you say Freya, the Froya.
Okay. Yeah, with the umlauts. She's watching the people walk down the street, and she's like, oh, they're youngling on the leash on all fours. And I was like, that's really funny, because she's just seeing a person walking a dog, and it's like, oh, the hair hasn't like fallen off yet or shed yet. That's funny. That's just a funny like misconception right there. So yeah, anyway, I just thought that was funny. I think, like I said, I think you're a good writer. I don't laugh much when I read books at actual humor. And so it's actually pretty impressive that I was able to get a laugh out of your book. So good job.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
Well, I mean, it is really cool. I think what you're doing is really fantastic. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd love to share with anybody that is going to watch about your book, about your writing process, anything else?
Nothing in particular, but I am very communicative. So if you wanted to reach out and get in touch with me and talk about, magic, mayhem, chaos, Vikings, whatever, I am totally down for conversation. You can find me on social media again, and I'm here.
Awesome. Yeah, I can testify that she is definitely open to communication. She answers pretty quickly. So
yeah.
Yes. Well, Sasha, thank you so much. It was truly a delight to hear all about your interesting, insane, but totally makes sense process of how you came up with Urban Fantasy Vikings.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Of course. Well, everybody, thank you for watching. Make sure to check out all of her stuff on social media. Get her book. Read the first part at least, and I promise it will hook you. I have a hard time physically reading stuff. I'm an audiobook guy, but it hooked me, and so I promise it's worth it. Support her. Coming out in June, right? June 7th?
Yes, that is June 7th.
Okay.
Of a Viking.
This video will be out by then, so let's make sure everybody knows. So, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.